It's because I'm trying to read 10-point aerial from 40 foot away. Hello. Let me start my timer. So, my name's James O'Brien. Here is a picture of me. Well, hello. And I am a UX consultant, have been freelance for 12 years now, and I've worked with an awful lot of companies in that time, and it has left me bitter, twisted, warped, and angry. Because I've worked with a lot of Agile-first companies that had trouble understanding UX. I've worked with a lot of design-first companies that had trouble understanding Agile. And so, instead of designing experiences, I've tended to be designing organizational change. And I hate doing that. I'm an introvert. Organizational change means dealing with people, and that's horrible. So, what I want to do is enable all of you people in this room to do the organizational change for me, so that I don't have to do it anymore. I can get on with sitting with my headphones on, sketching things on paper. And to do that, I'm going to tell you some lies about Agile. Because there are three really big lies at the heart of Agile, that we can't interact properly with an Agile team until we understand them, and until we can push back against them and, as Sophie says, experiment with new ways of doing Agile that support both the needs of the dev team and the needs of the UX team. So, lie number one, which is Scrum, Lean, TDD, test-driven design, Prince 2. Thank you. The lie here is that this, and only this, is Agile, and if you do everything in this methodology, you're being Agile. This is a thing that tends to come up when you have design-led companies who are trying to become Agile. They read a book like a book on Scrum, a book on Lean. They go, brilliant, we'll just do all of these things, and then we're suddenly Agile. And what happens is you do cargo cult Agile if you do it that way. You start following processes that you don't understand. So I've seen stand-ups where people have read a thing where they say, right, in a stand-up, we say what we did yesterday, what we did tomorrow, and any blockers. And so people stand up and they say, yesterday I designed this, today I'm designing this, no blockers. And then 5 minutes later you say to them, where's the wireframe from yesterday? Oh, I couldn't finish it because I'm waiting for input from a stakeholder. You said no blockers. Oh yeah. If you don't iterate on the processes themselves, if you don't develop your own Agile process, this is no use to any of you. By the way, anyone who's asking, oh, hang on, that's the next slide, sorry. See, I told you I needed my notes. Tom Czarniecki, who I was very, very fortunate to work with at ThoughtWorks, tweeted this a little while ago. I think it's wonderful. Agile is do, reflect, adapt. That's at the heart of every Agile process. It's at the heart of every Lean process. Anything else is your own invention, I think is a better way of putting it than illusion, delusion. By the way, anyone who is asking, is Prince 2 really Agile? Yes, it is. I found a book that says so. Including DSDM as well, which is brilliant. So that's how you manage Prince, which is archetypal waterfall, and turn it Agile. Line number 2, am I too close here? Should I hold this here? Is about the iteration. So this is me going back on what I just said about Tom Czarniecki's tweet being fantastic. This is the iteration. This is develop, test, refine. And this is also a lie. The lie here is that this, and only this, is all there is to Agile. Because in what I will call platonic Agile, it's true. Iteration, reinvention, all the loops are wonderful things that really create great software. But as a developer-led methodology, there's a few bits missing there. The problem is, that's not how companies don't conceive of products, by coming up with a business need, walking down to the development room and saying, solve this business need for me, and I'll be back in a week with another business need that you can then iterate on. What actually happens is a rather messy process where someone has an idea, a bunch of stakeholders get in a room and have a requirements gathering workshop and come up with all the features that this product could ever possibly want. Then they do some prioritization in probably a Moscow session, hence Moscow. Then they come out of that with a set of epics. So you've got user can log in, user can send email, user can log out again. Then they send that for estimation, and the developers work out how it's going to fit into the project plan. Then the stakeholders go, what? And another round of Moscow happens, and a much smaller product comes out of the other end. And then the BAs will decompose that into stories that can then be actioned on. That becomes your backlog. That's what you estimate on. That's what goes into the iterative development cycle. As you may have noticed, there's quite a long process before we reach that iterative development cycle. And if you try and do this, which is to do the UX one sprint ahead, there isn't really a lot of time for you to do a lot of very serious thinking about this massive planning process that you've gone through to get here. It's probably possible to do interaction design this way, but where we need to be much more involved is in the planning process and making that a much more iterative agile process as well. Line number 3. This is one of my favorite ones. Line number 3 is all about velocity. Hands up who doesn't know the term velocity in an agile project? Cool. Okay, one guy here. Velocity is at the start of a week, or start of an iteration, whether it's week, 2 weeks, month, whatever, you sit down, you lay out all the stories that you intend to deliver in that iteration, and you put an estimation against each of them as to the amount of effort it will take. Then, when you have finished your iteration, you look back on all the stories you delivered, you look back on the numbers that you estimated against them, and you say, right, our velocity was all those numbers added together. And that compares to the total number of additions that we've got for the entire project, which sits at the top of our burn-up chart, and every so often the line does that towards it. The lie about velocity is that it exists. Because think about it, what's going to happen is at the start of the week, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to say, I think this particular piece of functionality will take me 2 days. If it actually comes back and it's taken 4 days because there was hidden complexity in there, your velocity falls. If it comes back and it took less time because it turns out there was a shortcut you could take, your velocity rises. Project managers will tell you that velocity is a measure of the progress of the project, how well it is on target towards delivering the final set of functionality. Velocity is actually a measure of how accurate your estimation process is, which is ferociously useful. But the really important thing to understand about velocity is it was not a measure that ever existed until it was created by developers as a useful tool for them to understand how their estimation works, and was then co-opted by the rest of the Agile team in order to create something that says, in a rough sense, here's how close we are to being on target to reach our release targets. What if we could do the same for UX? What metrics could we put into this system that allow us to give, as Iwe said, a measurable response, a measurable proof of what we've added to the project, where we are, what we've delivered, how successful it's been. So those are my 3 lies. Next thing I'd like to talk about is a bit of a history lesson. I want to go back, as Sophie said, 11 years to the birth of Agile, and I want to talk about why we have Agile in the first place. We have Agile because we had waterfall. Speaking of water. And in waterfall, we know this process. The process is already defined about how we're going to build this thing before we start. So we receive a functional spec from the business, they hand it down, they say, these are the features it must have, this is how it must look, this is how it must be delivered. When it's finished, bring it back to me and I'll sign it off and tell you everything's okay. So what you tend to get with products that are built that way is, because there's no testing done on the feature set, you tend to get a good bit in the middle, which people will actually use, will actually enjoy, will engage with in your product. A pointless bit around the outside, which is all the other things that the stakeholders thought would be valuable. And we call that bit in the middle business value, because that's what actually makes your product successful. So in Platonic Agile, like I discussed before, what happens is we capture that business value, we define the functionality that delivers it. So for every piece of business value, we say, here's how I'm going to deliver this thing in the most perfect possible way. And then we build that bit of value, we hand it back to the stakeholders, and we say, is that right? And they go, yes or no. Actual Agile, I think we had a discussion about how Actual Agile works. I don't know if you remember. Which means, like I said, the business value doesn't get fed in the way it's supposed to at the start of every iteration. And this is particularly the case in companies that value design, because a company that values design is defensive of its design. It wants to make sure that good designs make it into production. So what actually tends to happen in Actual Agile is during that planning process, we get heavily involved, we produce very lovely deliverables which demonstrate exactly what we're thinking the whole way through, and then we get told this is going to an Agile team, so they need to have these deliverables for them. Then we create a deliverable that embodies all of our design and thinking and everything else that we could possibly throw into it, because we want to make sure that the devs have as much context as possible so they completely understand our vision, so it gets implemented perfectly right. And then they go off and build it, and they come back to us and they say, is this right? And we say yes or no. That looks a bit familiar. Defined process, functional spec, build it till it's finished. How do we turn Agile into waterfall? Let's take a step back, because my point earlier about defined processes not being Agile comes to the fore here. Agile is about what's in the manifesto, the 4 promises in the Agile manifesto, which are the things we value are individuals and interactions over processes and tools. In all of these things, the first thing I say is the most important thing. It doesn't mean we don't value the second thing. It's just that we want to do the first thing first. We value working software over comprehensive documentation. Working software is the only measure of process. You'll often hear Agile people say that. I completely agree with it. That's why I'm so bitter and twisted. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So this is not about what the statement of work says, what the contract says we will deliver. It's never about scope. It's always about we'll do this until you run out of money or we've delivered the perfect product. And finally, we value responding to change over following a plan. Now here's where I really need my notes, because I don't know what the next slide is. Right, reality check list. Hooray! Having told you 3 lies about Agile, I want to tell you 4 questions that you can ask yourself every time you become involved in an Agile process, whether it's at the start, whether it's halfway through, whether it's very near the end. And these hopefully will give you the ability, like Iwam, like Sophie have both said, to experiment with the process, to find what levers you can pull to deliver something better into this whole thing. So each of these questions aligns with one of those principles in the Agile manifesto. So for individuals and interactions over processes and tools, the question you should ask is, what is the best way to get my vision from my head into the heads of my team members? And I'll tell you one thing, the answer to this is never a full spec. It's always conversations, sketches, co-working, pairing, design in the browser. Any of these things that you can do that will help your development or other colleagues understand rather than just parrot is really valuable. People who do Agile tend to be really smart, tend to have their own way of solving things, and what they need is direction, not specification. For working software over comprehensive documentation, again, this is about deliverables. What's the simplest way to communicate my vision for delivering business value? Because the last thing I want is to waste time writing bits of spec that are of no value, that won't get implemented, that at the moment change rears its head, I end up having to spend 4 days going through an Axio document, changing every string of text in it. For customer collaboration over contract negotiation, the question is, how do I involve my customer to the degree that they have ownership? Because if you can give them ownership, they won't have that control freak tendency where they need to see everything before it's developed and they need to sign it off after it's developed. They'll understand that this is an evolving process. So design thinking is really valuable in this. Co-workshops, co-design, anything that gets you away from slapping down an Axio document on their desk and saying, sign that off and we'll go and build it. Finally, for responding to change over following a plan, the question you should be asking yourself is, when change happens, how do I make sure my vision can adapt to it? So if your vision lives in the heads of other people in the project, that's ideal, because they're the ones who are sensitive to change, they're the ones who have lots of ideas and can come back and help. If your deliverables are lightweight, that's ideal, because lightweight deliverables are easy to change. If your vision and your holistic approach is flexible enough as well, then it means that you're ready for change. If you aren't ready for change, even if you're only sketching and only having conversations and you can't let go of the ideas that are in your head, it's probably a sign that you need to step back and think more about the finished product than what you're actually delivering into the process. So break the process, change it up. And this is not the reason, again, that I'm not saying so you can change this process by doing X and Y and Z and these will be the perfect solutions for you, is because every single team, every single customer, every single project, and every single time you do this, it's going to be different. You have to ask those questions, and you don't ask those questions and answer them yourself. You ask those questions within the team, you encourage other people within the team to ask those questions. You ask it on the internet, you get as many viewpoints as possible to give you the tool set to begin to experiment, and then you test and refine those experiments as you go. And I just want to step back and say, in the same way that velocity is now considered to be a measure of how well developers are progressing towards the goal, what are the metrics that we as UX people can add that would reveal whether or not UX has been successful in a given project? Think about that. Think about how the 4 questions that I've just asked you could reveal answers to that, and think about what metric you would choose if it was to justify asking those 4 questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, James, Sophie, and take a 5-minute break now. Okay, executive decision, 5-minute break. It's quite hot in here, and there's plenty of drinks out there for you to guzzle. So, yeah, take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and have a Q&A session.